Here comes the Nastygram.
Send a priest to save my soul, forget it.
Welcome to the postscript, the Marvel Cinematic Universe post-credit sequence. I am Josh, and I was your game master for Empire's End, and I am joined by your lovely players.
Hi, I am Dean, and I played Commander Victor Argus.
Hey, I'm John, and I played Lieutenant Commander Poro Metalhead Randar.
Hey, it's Dan here, and I played Lieutenant Junior Grade Nero Horn.
Never promoted.
Never promoted, just the way I wanted it.
Hey everybody, I'm Matt. I played Gaius Loctus Vilfug.
Groovy. Well, if you may have heard one of these before, we usually do these after our arc ends, and just kind of an opportunity for. I mean, really, it's not for you. This is for us. This is for us to
This
fluff
is our
each other,
victory lap.
To wax poetic.
tell each other how fucking good and smart.
That was a really amazing moment.
No, your impersonation was best. Yuck.
Yeah, and you can sit there and watch it happen. No, I mean, it's just a cool chance to, like, because we certainly venture into table talk, but we more or less stick to building a storyline, and we don't get too meta. We don't let discussions go out about how the campaign is going during any of the episodes. So it's kind of a chance for us to look back and talk about how it went and shit like that. So why don't we just start it off? And I actually just want to say off the top, I don't know how this will in the end exist as a podcast product, as something to listen to. But I'll say, as a game, as a campaign, as an arc, this is one of the favorites I have been involved with, not just in terms of like Nastygram, but at all.
Yeah, I agree. This is up there.
Yeah.
Definitely for just role-playing wise, feeling, especially because these are characters that we didn't necessarily fully come up with. They were just handed to us, and the fact that they were fleshed out so wholly at the end of the arc was pretty great.
Actually, that's one of the first things I had written down. So why don't we just start with that? About how did you guys feel looking back now? How do you feel about the way we did character creation, which was basically I mechanically made this pool of characters and you chose them and fleshed them out? Do you think, I don't know, just what are your thoughts on how it worked out, and potentially if you would have done things differently now going back?
It's a nice change of pace. I think it's easy to get lost in the weeds of trying to make a character that is unique or interesting. Sometimes it's easier just to be handed a character that you then can expound upon, because you might find yourself expounding in a direction you hadn't planned on when you sat down. When somebody says we're going to do Star Wars, and then you sit down, you're wondering what it's going to be like, and somebody hands you a character, it starts to crystallize as to what it might be like. But then, truthfully, you don't really have an idea, because you're discovering these characters over the course of the campaign, which is what I like. You're fleshing out their personalities over the course of the campaign, which I like. And having the skeleton already kind of done is almost helpful. It reminds me of, it's like in D&D when they're like, here, we're going to start at 5th level. I'm like, okay, cool, yeah, let's just be done with all the bullshit, right? It's kind of what it reminds me of, instead of being like, okay, starting D&D, and I understand that there's plenty of fun to be had at level 1, but once upon a time when that got sickening, it was like when you didn't start at level 1, it kind of feels like somebody handing you a skeleton of a character that you can then flesh out. You're like, all right, cool, the bullshit's handled. I don't care about the mechanics. I never care about the mechanics of a character. I look at the character sheet as an opportunity for role-playing. So when I see a sheet that I didn't create, it makes me be a little more creative than maybe I would have, or at least takes me in a different direction than I anticipated.
I think that maybe it's something that other DMs out there can take a page out of Josh's book. Is that if you're trying to create a setting, screw Josh. It's just in general, like if you're trying to create a setting, and you have a framework in mind, sometimes players can come up with, me being one of them, can come up with some pretty outlandish shit when you're designing a character. And so a way to kind of rein it in and at least kind of start out on the right foot, so to speak, is to give these, your players this skeleton, as Dean said, so that they can build off of that, but it's already in kind of the sandbox that you created, rather than trying to, squash everyone into a setting, which can be fun too. Like you can pull from different backgrounds to create your storyline, but I think it's a way to really kind of hit the ground running to an extent with having these pre-made rough characters.
Yeah, you have these set guidelines that you're kind of setting from the outset of like these are senior officers. They're skilled at some level in the things that they do. That's kind of where I want your character to be. And then you can go from there. I mean, I really like it. I wish I did more of that, where I found maybe even random generators just to get ideas for what characters are supposed to be or what they're supposed to be like is helpful to me. I'm the kind of person who goes to a restaurant and I would love for someone to just hand me food and I don't have to make a decision about it. Cause you get to experience new and interesting things and try to hash out what your characters, although to be fair, my character is probably the most like one I would make anyway. Which is probably not great. I probably should have played one of the other characters in hindsight. Maybe I would have picked the engineer or something like that to be a little bit different.
I bet that's a question.
You were going to play an engineer to be a little bit different.
Well, I mean, I could have played Thorn maybe. Right?
Yuck. You'd have been killed the fourth
That's
session.
gross.
Yeah, I liked it. Kind of for the same reasons John did, but not really. Like, I liked not having to make some of those decisions, but like I definitely would have built the Doctor differently. Like, I would not have used some of the like stats that you did, but they wound up working really well for the story. So that, it's an advantage to have your DM design your character so that you're not fucking putting points into something that is 100% useless, which I'm pretty good at.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say, joking before, but like this definitely was not like any kind of fucking master plan. It was literally just out of necessity because of what I was trying to do. I was trying to make a pretty specific campaign, and I wanted there to be a little bit of a reveal. I didn't want to tell you guys. I would have had to tell you so much about the campaign to have you make appropriate characters.
Right.
Yeah.
To really like tip things a lot. And I ended up backing off. I kept it much more to a skeleton. And I am impressed with where you guys went with it. I love how all these characters developed, and it's funny, like, not to fucking, people talk about like role playing as actors or like acting. Like, obviously we're not fucking actors, but like, there is kind of an interesting part of like, when an actor plays a role, they're not making up a character unless they're an improvist.
Mm-hmm.
They're handed a character and then they're filling it out. And it kind of was like a cool opportunity maybe as a player to, like, Dean was talking about, you look for inspirations that are on that sheet.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just neat because you guys all took them in a different direction than I would have imagined.
I wonder if you could take that further and rather than DM making it, have your fellow players make your own character and then pass it to you.
That would actually be a pretty fun.
That'd be
fun
pretty
line.
It would be
Yeah.
fun. I mean,
Make
Oh
it
my
back,
God.
pass it to the right.
I would make Dan the most boring fucking character in the world.
yeah, bring it.
You're a
One
farmer. You're the
paragraph.
son of a farmer, and you once
Yeah.
made love to a goat.
Oh,
That's it.
oh,
That's your
yeah.
character.
That's
Yeah.
pretty exciting, though. That's pretty dynamic.
His parents are nothing until the third movie.
Yeah.
So what I was thinking too is, when you're designing a campaign around a story that's going to be, we are all within the same exact military and we all have the same exact goals, presumably. We're all on the same team and we all have the same code of conduct, presumably. I think pre-gens really serve that purpose because what it does is it allows the person who has an idea for the story, in this case, Josh, to go, okay, listen, this is kind of the direction I imagine this game going. So pre-gens make complete sense for this, and then they can flesh out personality. And I think that's how you keep your game on track right from the start, versus it being, you don't want 5 different people on the Enterprise and 5 different parts of the ship that are completely unconnected. So the framework has to be, okay, these guys are going to work in the context of the story I want to tell. Personality-wise, doesn't quite matter as much, so much as these are the positions, because I know they're going to be the ones interacting, right? It serves that purpose well, whereas you need that a lot less in something like D&D. So outside of the fun of it for a player, there's a lot of utility in it for the storyteller.
I think, too, that actually kind of, I don't know if we've talked about this before, maybe in one of the other things about like character creation, but it's a little like alignment. We've talked about this before. If you have a group with alignments kind of all over the map, you start getting, the center doesn't always hold in terms of all the players working together. Whereas to what you just said, Dean, we're all Imperials generally, and we're all generally like-minded and heading towards a particular direction. So it's a good way to, I think, keep the party on track out of the gate.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. It comes out on the track, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. And it's something I've spent a lot of time thinking about as the campaign went along, as the arc developed, and then like thinking back, this would have gone totally differently depending on the makeup of the characters you picked, right? Like, sure. I gave you guys 6 options, mm-hmm. and I spent a lot of time in advance working out what this VRX system was, who the players were in it, what are some of the major events that are going to happen based on, the outside forces that are going to act on it. But I didn't really have like a set storyline or adventure path, with the exception of the CO getting kidnapped, like kind of like the very, very beginning shit. And I think if you guys had chosen different characters, it might have been a very different feeling campaign.
Might have been like all on the surface, or like a lot more on the surface, or
I mean,
if one of us is Cass,
if you have Cass the engineer instead of like Orn and
the doctor,
like that's
a very different term.
You kind of lose all the intrigue,
mm-hmm.
not all of it, but
the intrigue.
No, it's funny because I see the doctor as very intriguing potentiality.
I was saying if you guys had picked like the engineer and Cass instead of the doctor,
right,
and like Orn, but so that was that definitely made a big impact. But I want to ask another thing, because you guys are talking about it sort of on the idea of playing Imperials, and so I already fucking just said that I absolutely love this arc in this campaign. But I'll say this: I think if Nastygram lasts for fucking years, as I hope it does, and we have many, many, many different arcs, I think this will always be one of our least popular arcs. I think.
Really?
Because I think it's a niche within a niche within a niche.
True.
It's, it's enough for an actually role-playing podcast. It's one that's very story-driven in general, like our style, like, not tons and tons of action and dice rolling. Then we take that even further. It's a very talky. There's a ton of NPCs. There's so much going on. Then on top of that, like I wonder, because we were talking about this before we started recording, Jake, who you guys know, is listening at home like a fucking, like one of you plebes. And he said he kind of found himself rooting for the rebels sometimes. So that brings me to the question
of,
we
did our job.
Right. Yeah, so how did you guys feel about playing Imperials? And I'll say, for the audience's sake, one of the things I told you at character creation, and it's probably in the session 0, was in terms of Imperial allegiance, I want you guys, I think I said like between a 3 and a 7 or whatever.
I remember
like
that.
Somewhere in the middle of the scale. Like,
great,
I don't want anybody who's like, I'm totally against the Empire entirely. I'm a fucking rebel.
Yeah.
Like I'm Finn waiting to fucking pop out. And also don't want a Thorn. All right.
Yeah.
So how did you guys feel about playing Imperials? How did you think it worked in the campaign? The story building, as protagonists in this story? I don't know.
Can I put a quick side note in here? I think, how many episodes has Jake listened to?
13.
So he's only halfway through, right?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, and a lot changes, I think, in the second half of this thing.
Yep.
Here's the thing, though. Like, I was with Josh and Jake when we were having that conversation, and his complaint about us being not like the Imperials you see in the movies. And here's the thing: is I think,
Amen.
yeah, right. So that's kind of it. Is that in some ways that I've been thinking about it as a Star Wars fan, I'm kind of tired of how Imperials have been portrayed. They're an enormous organization.
Right.
You have to imagine they have more
Yeah.
depth to them.
A lot of good people on both sides.
To be frank, I'm tired of Star Wars.
Yeah,
Sure,
With this game being the exception, and I know I'm not, and I know Star Wars isn't quote unquote made for me anymore. Really, it isn't, and believe me, I made peace with that after I watched Rise. But I think some awesome stories were told in what I believe is being called Legacy now, the original Thrawn trilogy, etc. But yeah, I liked a lot of the idea of this campaign kind of harkened back to that for me in my mind. So to tie that to the question, it was really fun. It was different because at the end of the day, we're not going to just, if we're going to like, what does it mean to not be the Imperials in the movies? That we're not going to make really dumb decisions all the time and be completely unlikable? Because if that's the case, who wants to listen to that? Aren't you curious to listen to some of the moral gray or some of that going on, right?
Well, we're more self-centered as opposed to altruistic, as opposed to evil. Like the Reiko Station is out for itself to make sure that Reiko Station continues to operate, protects its people, whatever. There are probably some bits of it that are a bit more dark than others. I
don't know what you're referring to,
but
it's
like,
I still find it interesting to not.
Yeah.
I still find it interesting to say, oh, I'm rooting for the rebels in this because I'm not sure I see any indication as to what would make them seem more.
He said,
good.
"I'm kind of."
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
He's not here to defend himself.
No, I know, but that's okay.
He gets one listen to Jazeera. He's going to be rooting for the pirates. That's for sure. And he's going to be insufferable because in our last one shot that we were just recording on Tuesday, he literally called out the end of the arc about us joining another empire.
Did he?
Breakaway faction? He did. And he's going to be so insufferable about that.
Yes, he is.
Well, he didn't call it out. He was like, well,
It would be interesting if...
Yeah, he's like, I get the story you're trying to tell, but like, it would be really cool if you like broke away and did something else. And I'm just sitting here like, yeah, motherfucker, it is interesting.
Ultimately, the goal was, for me, just I wanted to see how you guys would do this. Like, I didn't, beyond telling you that scale, I didn't tell you anything about like how good or evil to be.
Of course.
And I knew you guys are fucking great role players and that you would make these interesting characters that do have a lot of gray. And I think, for my point, watching you and watching this unfold, I think there was a great balance of, between hearkening to the tenets of like the empire that anyone serving it would, but also like, turning away from kind of the bullshit of it. And I think enough to make them likable as protagonists, even if there's things that, even if you don't want to fucking invite Argus over for dinner.
Outrageous.
Carve the fucking Christmas turkey with those gloves on.
Who posted that? Is his closet full of leather gloves? Oh my God.
Yeah, and I think it also allowed for some interesting internal, there was a bit of internal conflict, and I think we kept it, from becoming distracting just enough to be interesting. Do you think that Imperial, do you feel like it was constraining at all to the storytelling or you guys as characters that I did force you into pretty specific roles?
Yeah, I think it's just, it's like playing in the setting that you're in. That's to me, that's how it felt.
I mean, not to get overly philosophical, but it's more constraining than if there were no rules. But does that mean it was unenjoyable? No, not at all.
Yeah, agreed.
Do you know what I'm saying? Obviously it's constrained insofar as because there's actually parameters versus if there are none. But does that necessarily change it from how fun it is? Absolutely not. No, definitely not. It was completely fun. And I didn't feel, I suppose I'd never felt, while playing, I never felt like, oh man, I can't do this because I'm in this position. I never felt that way because I never do. And I've never have playing Star Wars ever,
Yep. Now on,
oh, can I just say this real quick? It's funny. It's the Imperial thing is almost kind of funny because while every time I sit down to play, every time I've sat down to play Star Wars, I've always thought about what I always have a rogues mentality when I play Star Wars. I'm always thinking I'm going to be a Fringer, and I think I still felt that way when I played this game, even though I was an Imperial. I was like, I want to take care of my men, but I don't know how much I care too much about central authorities, and if that means we're going to do something to survive. And do you know, like it almost felt like it had a pirate feel to it because we were, as John said, isolated, and I think that played into making it more interesting for me personally.
I think too, like when you're put in, in the category of being an Imperial, from a role playing perspective, there are a lot of tropes. There's a lot of stories that are, at least have familiar elements to them. But when you can put a filter like that on top of what you're playing, it forces you to, solve things in different ways. Right. And that's one of the fun things. I mean, we've talked about this. People may think that what we do here, some of the stuff is scripted or, we talk about it a lot, and we talk about the general direction, but the table talk that we do in terms of role playing is on the fly. And I think that's the fun part, being in those situations, making those calls.
Yeah. Well, fortunately, when your game master can't fucking hold it together and keeps breaking character while talking as a single NPC, it shatters the illusion that it's scripted.
Right.
But no. So speaking of constraining, I will say when I first conceived of this arc campaign, whatever, I had a very deliberate plan that this was going to be a sandbox campaign. How much do you guys feel after going through? How much do you feel that it was a sandbox campaign? How much of feel do you have that, like, you guys had full control over the story, or do you feel that at times you were kind of, I guess, go back to the word constrained, but sort of forced along through plot points?
I don't necessarily think it was forced or railroaded. I think it wasn't as sandboxy, but that's not a bad thing. I think you did a good job of putting problems in front of us and making us come up with solutions for those problems, as opposed to, really forcing your way through a certain area or a way of doing things. Like, the problem with the Jabuic sector, I felt like that was totally up to us, what we wanted to do. How we were handling the governor and how we're handling our relations with or lack thereof of the Kaleri was definitely up to us. The fact that we didn't talk to any of them for however many episodes.
Why would
staggering?
I mean, that's we weren't playing Imperials. We ignored an entire race and were like, fuck them. I'm pretty sure that's imperialistic right there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, couldn't be more. I think maybe I think what happens is in a game where it's sandboxy, so to speak, is, and it's kind of reflected in the game that we played, is that we start off slow, but once you start to kind of get your hooks into a few different story elements or lines, the pace picks up, and then it loses some of that openness, which I think is good,
right?
Because you want progression in the story, and that's kind of what you have to sacrifice, is you lose some of that kind of open-endedness because you're then on a path. Because things like the Kaleri, things like their tech, things like the Black Jesters, there are different elements that kind of fell to the wayside as we focused in on the story at hand. And I think that's just a side effect of the story going somewhere.
Yes, Dan, I agree. Yeah. It's funny. I think the term sandbox is interesting because clearly and pardon me, I'm feeling awfully philosophical this evening, which is probably bad timing for the recording of this. But I started to ask myself, what does that mean? But I obviously know what it means. I know I have an instinct for what it means, but I sometimes wonder if it's sufficient, because then I also think, okay, this is a podcast, right? So think about this. Once upon a time, you're 14, 15, 16, and you're playing Star Wars, and you have a ship and you have a crew and you're flying around and you're doing stuff. And then you're just like, hey, let's go to Corellia real quick. And the GM's like, okay. and you go to Corellia, and the GM's ready with a bunch of half-assed NPCs you're going to run to on Corellia, and he's maybe got an adventure hook. And then they're like, oh, let's go to Tatooine. I want to go. I want to see if we can talk to Jabba. All right. And you fly. Like, that's the true essence of like real sandbox. But does that work in a podcast? I don't know, because you're asking a lot of your DM to kind of be ready to truly embrace, like, okay, fly anywhere you want. Here's a Star Wars map. Go forth and conquer with your Black Sun Syndicate. You know, it's difficult. So I don't know if I would quantify it as a sandbox game, but then again, a sandbox has 4 walls, so maybe it is, and maybe it's just a little bit smaller, right?
Yeah, I mean, the other thing too is that in those games, you don't really have much of responsibility outside of the ship, whereas in this game, our characters had a but this game, our characters had a big responsibility to a bunch of people on a ship, and I think
correct.
You can only do so much in that sandbox without completely abandoning your character's principles about what they're doing on that space station. But the other thing too is I'm on the other side. I've been on the other side of coming up with a very improv game, and then having your players come up with really awesome ideas that you want to hook onto, and then it kind of it doesn't ruin the sandbox. It just kind of like you said, focuses in on the things that characters actually want to participate in, and you flesh those out. And I think that's just kind of how it works. You start in a sandbox. You start in this inciting incident like the commander, and then you have this whole problem that you have to deal with, and then you come up with little hooks here and here, and some of them catch and some of them don't, and then you focus in on what is actually interesting to everybody.
Yeah.
I want to say this too. I kind of, to be clear, I don't, and I might have confused anybody listening, but I don't mean, when I say sandbox, I don't necessarily mean constrained by geography.
Yeah.
Right. Because you might be all over the place doing the same single railroaded mission. It's just treasure hunt. A treasure hunt isn't really a sandbox, right? So,
right.
I mean, a sandbox could be, could take place in somebody's mind if you do it the right way, which is kind of cool. But no, it didn't. I think the word constrain has a negative connotation. So to say I felt constrained, I didn't, but I felt like Argus had a responsibility to where he couldn't just, go do whatever the fuck he wanted.
But that's what makes it interesting, right?
I agree.
Yeah.
I think it's partly a result to just me said the initial idea. I'm like, all right, they're going to pick from these characters. And the pretty early on, I realized, like, I'm going to put them in a station instead of a ship. That solves one problem. Because obviously I want it to be, even when I thought, like, okay, this is going to be pretty sandboxy, I want to define the sandbox. But I kind of thought of it of like, okay, like, there's some shit that could be going on around the Vad Belt. There's stuff going on here. Obviously, there's stuff at Virix too. Like, I spent a lot of time mapping out the system and who the players in it and everything like that. And then I realized, like, and especially as we started going, and I'm like, oh, like, I kind of like, they have roles and responsibilities. So like, they're not just going to be bouncing around checking shit out or like, so basically I found that I ended up making you guys react to a lot more things than I initially planned to. So I guess that's what I meant by that. It still feels sandboxy. Maybe the more of a question is, did you still feel like you were the primary writers of this story? Or did it feel like it was just reacting to stuff that
50,
was coming?
Yeah. And I think you have to, because there has to be content to react to. I mean, yeah, you can generate your own as well, but the whole relationship in role playing between a game master and their players, I think, is
circle of trust.
Yeah, circle of trust.
Jesus
is the balance is what Dean just said, is you want 50-50.
Yeah. It's funny. I compare it to, having only run, 2 arcs now, was that Nastygram. And I'm like, am I a fucking idiot? Cause like, I feel like Into the Storm, the first arc we did, I'm sorry, not Into the Storm. That was Jake's. That sucked. One shot.
I found in that one, I was rooting for the bad guys. The fuck out of here, Jacob.
For the dragon.
I'm his big brother. I can bust his balls. Nobody else will.
So, in one shot, all the things that in the after action, the kind of our little recap that we talked about why it works so well, I threw completely away when we did this. I fucking took and made the characters for you. I made the setting. I like, instead of like this collaborative, like, let's build this world. We're using Star Wars that's already all pre-made, and then I filled in all the details around it. And it's like, boy, did I just toss away all the reasons that first arc was successful.
I think it just shows that that there are different ways of doing it, and they're all pretty valid, because no matter what, we will have fun, I think, in whatever game we play, even despite of how it's created, how it's conceived by the GM, and how the players, how much they have to contribute to it from the get-go. No matter what, we make it our own at the end of the day, even if it maybe takes us a little bit longer game-wise because it's a sandbox. It's
sort of our MO, right? That the rules don't really matter.
Yeah, no.
So, I mean, a good story is a good story. So
getting into some more sort of like, I guess, character player specific shit. There was a ton going on in this arc. There's a fucking lot of characters. There's a lot of shit that happened. You guys individually, like from your character's perspective, or as a player, just shit that you're curious in, are there loose threads that you wish we'd had more time to pull on, or that or regrets that things that you wish you had kind of made more of a story, either as your character backgrounds or things that were existing in Virax that you interacted with, because at the end of the day, throwing so much out there, we're not going to resolve everything, because part of it was, let's determine like what are the interesting things to fucking focus on. So what do you guys think about that?
Well, I'm four or five pages into my Marita Argus fanfic that I'm writing. It's pretty steamy.
How many pairs of gloves have you gone through?
One per page. No. Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if it's a regret, but it's more of a wonderance as to a little bit more. I liked Orn's background coming into it a little bit. I am a sucker for the character that was Orn. That's I don't know do you have the question of who would you want to play, and is that going to come up before I blather it now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So anyway, I like the character of Orn, and I liked his criminal stuff coming up, and not just to hamstring him, and maybe it was occurring. There's a lot of Nastygrams between you and Dan, which Dan never really does that. But I know he was really stepping out of his comfort zone with his secret information.
Oh, yeah.
But I really like the idea of that kind of character, and part of me wanted to know Orn a little bit more, which is fascinating. When Dan is helming a character, you want to know more about him. Good luck, unless you want to read the book that Dan wrote about him. But,
GM's eyes only.
Yeah,
GM's eyes only. But no, that character intrigued me quite a bit. And I was thinking it would have been cool. I had this weird vision for Argus of, I don't know, maybe doffing the outfit, but keeping the gloves and striking off with Orn somewhere to start some pirate enterprising. I don't know. I'm not that I could ever foresee this campaign going in that direction, but I always think in an alternative, when you watch those Star Trek Mirror Universe episodes, like that's what I see. I see like him and Orn. And like on a pirate ship somewhere,
Dean, it's crazy because there's somewhere in my notes there is this idea that I get of Orn coming from the criminal background, working for a criminal overlord or an organization like that, and basically trying to push Argus in that direction.
Right.
And I think like it starts to show over the whole thing, which is cool. It's cool that you had that inkling.
I was
Quick
trying
side
to.
note.
Yep.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Just want a quick interjection before you guys pick characters, and and then things kind of move in the organic direction the characters were going to go. The basic idea of you in the situation was that which direction will they end up going in? There are these two Imperial factions. There's going to be the Black Jesters. There's going to be the Rebels, and then the different sides of the Cleary. And at first concept, I thought before we really started going, it could go in any direction. So it is very cool to hear you kind of say that was even like in the back of your mind that, that could have been a thing. But sorry, keep going, Dean.
Oh, sorry. And I was just going to say, I don't know if this plays into some of that, but with Argus, in terms of playing him, it was, I was trying to find what I wanted him to be, which always takes a few episodes, which takes a few sessions, which sometimes translates into many episodes. That's why sometimes, voices change a little bit or attitude. But ultimately what I wanted to do is, people are tuning in to listen to a game called Empire's End. And I wanted them to wonder. I guess my goal was, I want people listening to be like, what the fuck is Argus going to do next? Like, because I never completely went off the deep end, but I did start to exhibit dark side behavior as the campaign went on, but I still maintained party cohesion. But I wanted that. I wanted people to be like shocked, but it not to devolve into like 14-year-old bullshit. Like when you first get together, you're like, we're gonna be chaotic evil, and it's just
kill
like,
everybody in the tavern.
it's just fucking chaos. It makes no sense. So I wanted people to be wondering what he was gonna do next.
Cool.
I think that's part of a little bit of Orn too, is like, I didn't want to press so hard on the criminal element because we were part of this Imperial organization. We were part of this, moving in a particular direction, that it would be distracting. And
yes.
I mean, I think I left to you more often than not. And that's another one of Jake's complaints, is how easily everyone trusted me. But we talk about that because I'm a PC, there was probably a little leniency given, but leaving it in your hands, I think was, for me, it was a very easy way to kind of work with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was less, for Argus, it was less about trust and more about intrigue. Like I had these designs, like I said, in the back of my mind of like, what would life be like not constrained by the rules of the Empire?
Yeah. And that was really well built though into your character, Dean. Like that was part of Argus's, that was one of his bonds, right? Was
sure. Yeah.
Or I'm sorry, his
he had a bond with Nero.
He had a bond with Nero, and then he had the ideal overhaul Imperial Command ideology, the bond with Nero. So that really tied in. And I think you did a really good job of balancing that, Dan, of having a character who kind of, he could be that fucking like, I'm solo mission character with just enough intrigue. But John,
can I say something real quick about Orn? The other thing about Orn too is you have to remember is that Orn is an Imperial officer.
Probably some fucking Victor and Orn fanfic. Speaking of fanfic.
he is an Imperial officer. So it's not beyond the pale to trust him, right? Like we're all officers and we are PCs. We're all it's not like it's a pirate ship, even though it kind of times it felt like it. We've all been through the Imperial Academy. We've all got that training. So,
yep. Kind of going back to the question of like, are there things you wish you had focused on, pulled more on from your background, from stuff in the system, stuff that came up in the game, a lot of dangling shit. Matt or John, anything you want to jump on?
Yeah. I think for me, it kind of ties back to, you asking about the sandbox is like, if it was a sandbox thing, like there would have been tangents that, I would have wanted to go on, or Orn would have, that would have been like, okay, so it's just you and there's 3 other people sitting here for, an entire episode of you off and going doing one thing. Like my character had a lot of like sports background, there was a lot of gambling. Like I would have been fun to have explored that kind of stuff, but like that's not necessarily good for storytelling. Like if it comes up and I could have used it, like that would have been awesome, but I didn't really feel like I regretted not using any of it. You know what I mean? And I guess in a way I did use some of my athletic ability by fucking saving everybody's life multiple times. So
I think too, you had a couple of moments with like different authority figures like the governor and stuff like that, and talking in kind of hearkening back to that, to those qualities, to those backgrounds. It's one thing that like for Nero, I do wish that I had been able to create a little more of the, upper society, lower society contrast, like kind of fostered it somehow a little more.
Yeah.
Maybe gotten the doctor to sell more drugs to like people on the station or something like that. Like just incorporated the two, like our two different spheres a little more. That's maybe one spot, but again, like pace and direction kind of dictate some of those things sometimes.
Yeah.
I wish I would have, to be frank, there was a lot of time between a lot of the stuff. I think for me, in getting kind of busy, I wish I would have had a little bit more homework done in terms of just having better setups for how I wanted to run specific meetings, because a lot of it was on the fly, and that can be very difficult.
Yeah.
There's a lot of notes I wish I would have had right in front of me when it came time for some of those meetings, just because I felt like, okay, where were we going with this again, and trying to remember that stuff. But hopefully it's not too glaring on the actual podcast.
Anything for you, John?
Yeah, I think the conflict within Randar about basically the switch over to Jabuic, or even just what we were doing in general. I don't think he really voiced or acted on as much as I think I should have. I think there probably should have been more scenes with the rebel pilot trying to get back into his good graces.
It's a great scene, by the way.
Yeah. But like going back and trying to get him to open up again, because maybe at this point Randar is questioning everything. And so I think that's part of it. Yeah. And finding Randar's voice took me a long time. And I think it took me a bit too long for what it was. So, yeah, I wish I would have maybe done a little bit more to get that in the beginning, but yeah.
Yeah, I think the last few things for Nero is very similar to Matt's concept. Is like you can, as you're living in the character, you start to think about their motives and what they want to do and how they want to do it. But you know, you're on the ride with everyone else, and some of those things really have to take a back seat.
Yeah.
But because you start to learn, you start to gather all these interesting plot points, like the Cleary tech. I was working on I was putting character points into droid engineering so I could design my own droids and stuff. It's never going to happen. But
Of course, your GM hates robots. So.
Yeah, right. But also like interacting with the Doctor 2 with the parasite, like that would have been really cool to get into that stuff too. Like, you know, and not that we would implant it in people and control them.
No, of course
but
not.
Theoretically, it would be pretty awesome. So there are those scraps that are really kind of exciting, but at the same time, I think everyone makes little sacrifices for the story to kind of hone in on.
Yeah, and I think some of that comes back to the fact that, you know, this is a podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's always, we've talked about this over and over. It's super important that these games are our games. It's authentic. It's us playing our games, but we're not going to lie and pretend that, you know, we're not somewhat cognizant of the fact that it's a podcast too.
Of course we
because, you know, a lot of that shit, dude, we would have spent whole fucking sessions.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
You're right. Absolutely. We used to, still do when we're not on the microphone sometimes, still get really into the weeds. Well, I won't even go there, but I think what you're trying to say is basically it's the listeners that are ruining our fun. I think that's what we should take away from this.
I mean, so like, and I'll say for me as the GM, the things that building Virax and the stuff I had kind of planned, there's part of me that's like, oh man, I kind of wish like there had been more Black Jesters. They got their scenes here and there, but I thought they were going to be a bigger player at first. And I totally thought, and this took me a long time to figure out, fucking let it go, dude, and let them tell their story. Like, I thought this campaign was, a lot of it was going to always come back to the Kaleri. And that was going to be kind of what
it's about us. It's about us,
dude. Yeah. It was just like, but ultimately, I was wrong because, like, yes, they're the main populace of the system, and it was like, but that was in my mind, like, so it's like they have this. There's this. I put all this thought into this culture and their tech and like the background and then the different factions in them, and then Victor's like, we're in fucking space. Our job is to command bombard them. And he's completely right. Like, if I wanted to tell that story, I should have stuck you down in the fucking planet. Yeah. Like, so it took me like a while to give up the ghost that like that isn't gonna be. And I'm glad that like I think there were some cool interactions with it. I do really like the episode sequence after you guys get shot down.
That was great. Yeah.
Yep.
That look into it, but like ultimately, I think people also might look at that, or we could even look at it and be like, well, that's kind of like the Jar Jabba's palace and fucking Return. Like it doesn't really matter
Sure.
back to the rest of the
Yeah.
story.
Yep.
Doesn't mean I don't like it, but yeah, that was my.
Yeah.
I don't even know if it's a regret or whatever, but it was
It's just unexplored territory, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny.
Yeah,
You could have had 3 different stories. You could have had this intrigue. Where is the commander? If you held him, like you could have forced us to the ground by us never finding him and being like, okay, we have to set some kind of shop up down there. It could have been a creepy fucking, like the Thing by letting that worm loose on Reiko and turn everything inward. There's so many different ways you could have gone with the story, and that's what's cool about it. But yeah, it's funny that the Cleary became. And that was funny because that was me feeling. It's funny because I think, Josh, you set the game up for us to feel the constraints of resources, and you did
Yes.
a good enough job for me to say fuck the surface. we don't have the resources to go to the surface.
Yeah, and it, I mean, like I said, it makes sense, but a lot of it, I hope when I started to figure things out, right, it was, try to let it go in the direction that you guys want it to go. Like the stuff that you are investing time and energy in and your characters are making choices towards, like, well, that's the fucking stories that we should tell.
Yeah.
So I tried to, remain kind of open about that, besides the fact that aside from forcing you to interact with a Cleary at literally at gunpoint by shooting you down.
Episode 19, we finally talked to a counselor.
That's one of the regret is where it ended. Like for me and as the doctor, like where it ends, like I already have plans for what I want to do. Not like I'm sad that we may never go back to this because but that again kind of goes back to the sandbox. Like the things that the governor would do probably wouldn't involve a whole lot of, or what Gaius would do wouldn't involve a whole lot of like Reiko Station. Maybe it would, but I'd have my own plans that I would take care of.
Yeah, that was another thing I want to ask. Let's do it right now. Without going too overboard.
Sure.
I want you guys each kind of give me a little glimmer into like where you think your characters might continue in this world. And also like as a player, how much interest do you think you would have in revisiting this either on or off the podcast or as bonus feed on the podcast or something like that? So Matt, I mean, if you want to fucking jump right into it since you already kind of brought it up.
The governor's new policies.
13 out of 10 would play again. And like with Gaius getting the governorship of the system, essentially having that worm to now study and know what else is out there with that tech, like Gaius would definitely make plays to make Virax a like major power player with the Cleary technology, the basically partnership with our own new mining company, and that worm. Like Gaius is gonna fuck some shit up.
What's the worm's name? Did you name it?
No, not yet. Probably never. It'll probably be Specimen 1. And, it won't be until like we get to Specimen 13, 14, where, I'm getting the results that I want, before I name it.
It's like Wormus Vilfugus. Like you gotta give it one of gotta give it one of those fancy names after yourself.
I actually thought if I named it, I would probably name it after like Hethna.
I feel like I feel it's like one of the most imperialist things you can do is take something that a group of people have known about forever and just totally rename it and discovered it.
Yeah.
That's funny.
All right. Any other guys?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely play this again. Randar, I think, can go two ways. Either he's going to give up. He gives up the XO at the end of the arc, and he does go back to being the CAG, or he leaves the Imperial Navy and goes civil and works for Merida and still on station, still is around, but works as a civilian security pilot. Basically, runs her security.
Not a big difference. Still nasty pilot calls everybody their first name.
I think Victor's going to cook up some kind of scheme with Orn to get out of there, and probably leave his command rank on the desk somewhere, and probably somehow try to use Imperial funds to get money to Merida. Some kind of scheme to where Merida can help Orn and him get the fuck out of there and go start there. Go start there. No, I'm just saying, in an alternate universe, that would be really fun.
Okay.
You know, to kind of whisk myself off. But I don't know. I think if we see the way the story is going, you know, I can imagine Argus sitting around his office, you know, intently staring at his space coffee mug, trying to make it move. You know, I don't know. I think he would. I think Argus would be beyond Reiko. I think he would want to go beyond Reiko into whatever capacity that is. I'm not sure. I don't know. Maybe to some kind of bigger posting, maybe to a bigger vessel. But yeah, if things go the way they go in the galaxy, he's not super loyal to the Empire. He's more loyal to the people he's working with. So I think that opens him up for a lot of possibilities. But I think he's thinking these two sector commanders at war with each other is probably not great for his long-term survival, but I think he would stick it out for a while because he wouldn't want to abandon people. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I think he would hang out, but I think ultimately once things were secure where they were, I think he'd probably want to, he might want to move on, or he might want to become a bit enterprising and thinking of striking out on his own.
Interesting. All right.
I think for Nero, it's he has largely kind of hitched his wagon to Argus, and part of that is, you know, at different points in the story too, we talked about like Argus taking power, right, and the relationship that he had with the Doctor and keeping the CO under, and when
for his own safety.
when Nero, right, he's a survivor. It's kind of one of his core tenets.
Sure.
And so by kind of, you know, again, hitching his wagon to someone he thinks that can provide that safety and provide that insulation is a big part of his drive. But also, I think from a meta perspective, sometimes I see, you know, the further you go up that command chain, the further you go up in that responsibility in a corporate way, the harder it is in a role-playing setting to really get away with it, which is why, like, I think always the indie bent, the rogue bent is always appealing, because it still allows you the flexibility to go out there and reinvent yourself, to go out there and start over, to go out there and do what you will without necessarily the constraints of, you know, working for a big organization. So,
and that's Argus's problem is it's going to be difficult for having gotten command relatively quickly in Reiko and feeling there's probably a bit of an arrogance to him in terms of his self-worth, even though it doesn't always come off that way outside of, you know, being vengeful to people who cross him. But I think he's the kind of person who would start to see the constraints of the upper echelons of power, and it's funny. I think you realize less people have command over you the higher you go up the chain of command, but also the more out in the open you are, in way more control at a higher level you really are. You know, you can't disappear like some fucking janitor at the bottom of decks in Reiko. You know, you start to become that much more visible, which isn't something he loves. He doesn't mind the power because he likes to be, you know, in control of his own fate, and that's what I mean by like maybe striking out would be. He would only do that if he felt he could acquire more power and security for himself, you know, versus staying in the chain of command.
I think the kind of the interesting thread is one of the accesses to power is obviously the technology of Kaleri. And so the relationship with the governor, Matt, and harnessing that technology is a huge kind of
it's a good point.
You know, plot point that can be developed, because that's what Nero's really looking at. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's also what interests him is, you know, tech and the biomechanics of things, of the worms and all sorts of stuff like that. And I think so. He's very keyed into that as being a gateway to something greater. Really, kind of more security, more safety, more power.
So what you're saying is we're sitting on Reiko and we run Reiko, but really we run the system.
Right. So,
Well, I mean, you do now
Yeah.
between you and Dr. Wilfug.
Correct.
You are the two players in the system,
Right.
along with maybe Marita. But yeah, I
Nah,
think
we run this bitch.
there's, I mean, like I said, I really love this arc. I love these characters, this little mini setting. So there is a part of me that really wants to return to it, but there is also reality I was thinking about of like it was already kind of hard to make
Yeah.
these characters work, and try to make sure that there was always enough for everyone to do, and
right.
stuff that was appropriate for them. And I think that only gets harder as you all move up. You gain
Yeah, exactly.
power and responsibility.
That's how it always goes. Yeah.
It's why I loved that I stayed Lieutenant Junior grade. Like honestly, that it gives you a certain freedom. It gives you a certain power.
And again, and maybe we never will because we always have so much new shit we want to do.
Yeah.
Of course.
But there was a thought that I had of, well, what if it's this system? Because it is also like, as Dan was talking about, there is very much the idea that Virex will not be a backwater anymore. Like this is going to become a much, much more important place, and everything that goes along with it. Maybe ships get stationed there, and Victor's, Argus is now, moving up in his command of this little task force, whatever. But that makes it even harder. So what if that's the setting? These four characters become NPCs that I'd let you guys sort of make the choices for, and you play four new characters that exist at a smaller level in a flavor that we want,
Right.
But just a passing idea I had of how to possibly kind of make it work.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Yeah.
So I only got a couple more things I want to throw around, and then anything else you guys do. One is a quick one, which is as Dean kind of hinted at before. If we had to go back, start the campaign over, and you guys had to play one of those other 6 characters besides the one you picked, who would you go with? Dean, why don't you go first? Because I think you already tipped your hand.
I did, but I might flip you.
Ooh,
I'm highly intrigued.
sexy.
I'm
Flip
highly
me over.
sexy.
Stuff me in the pillow.
I'm highly intrigued by Orn, but I think I would have picked the Doctor.
Doctor's a good one.
Yeah.
And you guys can say the same character too if it's the one you would have chosen.
For some reason, the Doctor role always intrigues me in everything. Star Trek Doctors I always like. I think the Doctor is the master of his own realm. He's very much the CEO of his own position, so to speak. And
a
he has
chaplain.
a lot of, say again?
Like a chaplain.
Yeah, you're right. Meaning he runs the show. The Doctor is an interesting character. And I always think of course, Gaius Baltar, because no one challenges his expertise, even though there are people that have more power, quote unquote, than he does. And I always think that that's one of those interesting roles because a doctor can be useful. And from a role-playing context, it can be useful in the context of, combat. It can also be useful in the context of social engagement, as we see with Matt's use of the doctor, which is awesome. And it can also be used in just, almost going off script to create something like, I want to make a medicine, or I want to do a thing, or you start getting a doctor who's got a little bit of a fringe bend to him, and they start to become very interesting characters. I just love the idea of a doctor. When we think of doctors nowadays, well, maybe not these days, but we would think of them as like, come on in, young man, and we're going to tap your knee and send you on your way, a pat on the bottom, whatever the fuck they did back in the 40s.
Wow. Want to talk about it?
Fucking, I'm not that old. And their fucking glasses on. And they come to the house with their leather pouch and they're just sweet. But then I also like the idea of like the Wilfugs of the world, the guys you're not sure about that are still doctors. And, there's, I don't know if you ever saw Any Given Sunday. It's a weird picture, but it's a sport movie. But James Woods plays the doctor, and these guys are getting their fucking bells ringing. He's like, yep, you're fine. Go back out there. Like it's like one of those kind of sketchy doctors you're not sure about. I like characters, especially in a podcast setting, where you're like, I'm not quite sure about him, even though you make it work in the end, because it adds a layer of interest.
Yep.
And the doctor role is just always interesting to me. The medic,
All right.
the medicine man.
All right. So who else? We got Dean as the doctor in fucking Empire's End V2.
I think I'd want to play Cass. I think playing the Marine would have been fun. Being like a hard ass Marine, I think that would be interesting. And I think I would have probably played him a bit because of the guerrilla background. Maybe playing him a bit more on the 4-3 of Imperial allegiance. And
John
seeing
just
how
can't
that,
bring himself to be a 7.
I just can't.
No matter what. You could give him Darth Vader, he'd be like, I'm a 4.
I'll give you 5 max. I cannot go above a 5. But to be that, like, you're in this position where you are very disciplined and but you also have this reservation to some extent of what you're doing there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
It'd been fun.
That's awesome, John. I could see it.
Matt or Dan?
I don't know.
She's like, I'm the fucking doctor. Fuck you.
Yeah, like Dean said, like I never, like, I don't know if it so much came across, but I never really felt like I had to do anything Argus said or that I didn't want to do.
Right.
Like,
Argus was very aware of that fact.
Like, what are you going to do? Throw me in jail? Well, then you're all going to fucking die. Like, you're going to piss me off? Like, I'll fucking poison you. Like, I'm the doctor. Nobody's going to question what I'm going to do. So I'm going to do what I do. And you're going to leave me the fuck alone.
Yeah, that's a good way to put that. Like Dean said, he's kind of like the master of his domain or whatever. Right. You know?
Yeah. But I think,
especially when you have the guy who's supposed to be in charge in a medically induced coma, that helps for leverage.
I know.
But,
if push came to shove,
push comes to shove, you got to pick one other one.
I probably would have gone with Randar,
the pilot.
Yeah, like I think that would have been a lot of fun. I don't know if I would have been Argus's second in that role. Like, I think I probably would have. I would have played it a little bit differently, and like I would have wanted to be more of that, like, hotshot pilot kind of thing, like that. You know, that style I think would be a lot of fun. Because again, kind of master of your own domain. Like, if you're the Red Baron, like, what are you gonna do? You're gonna tell him no, you can't fucking do something? Like, yeah,
you're
I
not
will.
Gonna tell Maverick you can't fly.
Yeah, exactly. Nobody puts baby in the corner.
And Danny boy.
Yeah, I've been thinking about it. The doctor is always appealing. But for the sake maybe of a different answer, it's what is kind of scary is Argus. Argus to me is arguably one of the hardest ones to play because of
you ain't kidding. It was
because
you kidding.
you can pivot it like. There are so many directions you can take it in. Granted, we're obviously all aware that we're trying to cooperatively play this game and do it together. But having that command authority is very interesting because you could. It reminds me of that moment where Dean immediately offered his hand when they were saying, like, yeah, Compnor's not in the Jabooing system. And he was like, I'm in. And John's eyes like just went wide. It was like, whoa! Like, it's very easy to be able to, having that power, you could just springboard off the game off into an entirely different direction, and which is, it's kind of compelling stuff.
Cool.
Yeah.
Nice. That would have been a different little group. It's funny. Like, that was, I had no idea how the CO thing was going to go. Like, I knew the brain slug thing was happening, but there was, I generally thought at that cliffhanger, we wrapped a session with Celavar having the CO at gunpoint. I thought you might have just made a play for him, and it was going to come down to rolls and then, also would have come down to, like, I didn't directly from the beginning rule that, okay, the CO is going to be out of the picture and, Argus is going to be in command the whole time. So I hope it didn't feel that way. No. That was largely based on decisions you guys made.
I mean, that's what made it
Decisions they
so
made.
much shadier, is that right? Because you have obviously Dean's decision, then Matt following it, and then Nero reinforcing it.
Yeah.
Like, so it was a really cool build, in terms of these people want to stay in power,
Yeah.
and without necessarily jeopardizing the integrity of the entire group.
Yeah.
It was cool.
So final thing on my end, and then obviously anything else people want to bring up, but just kind of this obligatory dick sucking. Favorite moments for characters, fucking, scenes, any kind of shit you just kind of want to highlight. I mean, like there are so many that I fucking love, but there is sort of like, I think I was like, is there like an iconic one of each character? And
My favorite for Randar was when he gave Thorn his promotion in front of nobody. That was so fun to roleplay. That was so fun.
fucking great.
Because it's a moment you can see happening, right?
Yeah.
That's
He's just sliding him completely.
Yep.
Nice.
I'm trying to remember them all. There's so many.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So good at role playing, Dean.
No, I mean for you guys.
It's funny because I thought about this question before we came here, and there are definitely moments that I absolutely love, but one looking
and I do want to hear like for your personal character, and then if there's shit that you really
Sure.
loved from
part of what I realized was I really like where Nero started and where he ended, because at least because there's things that obviously as listeners you don't really get you don't hear all the inner workings of every player and how they're thinking about their character. And for me, it was very much, this sort of tech guy that had made his way into the darker spheres of life and working for a syndicate and then getting in trouble and getting out of it. But then it kind of coming back around, and his evolution of his never having seen people being killed before and how that affected him with, taking the drugs and then even ending up killing someone very callously at the end. That whole arc was really satisfying.
Yeah.
And that was kind of like the
can't escape the circle.
Yeah. It was a really cool kind of inevitability.
Yeah.
that
kind of
felt
finally
like-
became the thing that you always pretended to be to impress chicks.
Yeah, right? 100%.
Stone Cold Killer.
Warren's like a Scorsese character. He never quite gets away.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
I think like moments or like scenes, that's tough. Like there were so many good ones, and like I think that's the thing for me with this was I watched the 4, 5, and 6, the original trilogy. I never really watched the new ones, and I did, or whatever, 1, 2, and 3. I don't even think I saw 3. And then I didn't even see any of the other ones that came out except for Solo and Rogue One. So like, I've kind of been over the Star Wars, and when you first proposed this, I was like, yeah, okay, it'll be fun. I've never played it before, but like, I don't really know much about it outside of the movies, and I don't really care too much about it. But like, I really enjoyed just the entirety of the story, because it's always the rebels, the good guys, like okay, cool, good, you always triumphs over evil. Like, I don't give a fuck about that anymore. Like, I want something different, and like, this gave us the opportunity. Like, Gaius fucking kicking the grenade and saving so much. Like, that was fucking dope. Like the way Argus stabs the guy in the fucking woods staring at Warren. Like, that shit's fucking
That's one.
like that shit gave me chills.
There was actually a moment that I really liked with Argus 2, which was when you met Thorn in the airlock.
Oh my god!
Yeah.
That whole
I forgot all about that.
because like that's the best kind of storytelling when you can feel the pressure building. Like, it's not like, I love the action stuff. it's very cool. Sometimes, like to me, it's not quite as cool though as intrigue coming to a
I
head.
agree.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
that is like the penultimate stuff, because with the action, it's like rolling and kind of creatively spinning a moment and it like really kind of coming together.
Yeah.
But with the intrigue and the build towards the moment is really great.
And I want to go back and say, you know, if you ever heard us like laughing about like making references to fucking Transparasteel or like Ferrocrete, it was all because it was this running inside joke about how Matt was the only one of us who doesn't really, he's not a Star Wars nerd. And I want to give you huge credit for like the level that you got into it and your level of research, not just like Star Wars specifically. Like you would drop shit in between games. I was clearly like, I know you don't fucking know that because you didn't read that entire trilogy of books. And like on the medical stuff, like you,
Yeah, it was awesome.
you did a
Yeah, that's
really good
huge.
job researching your character so that your moments, you could really fucking punch it up and like make it authentic and cool and come home. And there were some very cool fucking moments in Med Bay.
Yeah.
I agree. I really liked the stuff with the doctor and the, I guess you would say, your head nurse or head doctor. I don't know if she was a doctor.
Yeah,
Doesn't
his
matter.
second
Harper, was it?
Yeah, Harper.
So that relationship I always enjoyed because it was cool to observe. Again, you're the master of your own world in the infirmary, and watching her start to wonder what was going on with you, I just loved.
Yeah.
I love like Dan saying the tension. I love watching the tension of her wondering what's going on with you, trying to figure out what's going on with you. All of the stuff with Hethnun keeping him under and the conversations between Argus and him about, you know, maintaining him under for his own safety and stuff. and yeah, I really, really enjoyed the Wilfug stuff quite a bit. And then John, if I may, I think John, what people may not know is that John knows how to fly planes in real life.
Yeah.
So
Even crashed them before.
And crash him, yeah.
knows how to crash land them and not die. So hats off to you.
Fly, yes. Land, no.
He flies kind of like Harrison Ford.
Hey, I've never
always-
landed on a taxiway. Thank you
He's
very
always
much.
putting it down on the fairway somewhere. But no, and I think that came through immensely in you talking the way you talked as a pilot.
Absolutely.
And I think that's huge for immersion. I really liked it. And the other thing I think you did a good job of, and I was just breaking your balls. I hope you know when I was talking about you're never going to be a 7 on the Imperial scale. I think you did a really good job of. Here's how I felt about Randar, and I don't even know if you meant to do this, but if you did or you didn't, I guess it doesn't matter. But I always felt like Randar was this character who was this really, really good pilot, and his men look up to him because he was a real ass dude. And as a consequence, he just kept getting promoted because the Empire is full of incompetent fucking dum-dums.
Right.
And he felt like Randar felt like, I'm doing a job I don't really want to do, but I do care about the safety of my men. And the whole Empire thing I don't really care about. I just care about flying well, making sure my guys fly well, and doing like that came off in a way that didn't ever feel like you were being too cheesy and like, oh, I hate the Empire. It felt like you were just like, hey, this is my gig. I don't know about all the big politics. I don't know about the horrible shit the Empire does. I'm just kind of trying to do my job and keep my guys alive. And I think that came off really well as like a old. He felt like a veteran pilot to me. He felt like a real veteran pilot to me, and that's one of the things I loved about him. And then,
Yeah, I mean, I kind of the idea that he was in the Republic and then it turned into the Empire, and maybe at the beginning of that part of his career, he was a bit more into what was happening in politics. But as it went on, all he really wanted to do was ensure that the people under his command were safe, and then
it was almost like the flag didn't matter. What mattered,
Yeah.
because you're like, yeah, well, this is going to change someday too.
right.
It was kind of cool. And I can't say enough good things about Orn. Just the entire setup of Orn was interesting. And I think you played him well, Dan. I think you had the most consistent character voice, even Yeah, 100%. And that's difficult to maintain. You know, I think you found Orn quicker than we maybe found our guys, except for maybe Wilfug. And that stuff just worked super well for me. Like, I don't know. I really think, like I said, if it's flip a coin between the Doctor and Orn is my second. But yeah, I liked the way you played Orn. I never felt like, it's funny because Orn is like this communications expert, but I never even visualized him as a communications expert. I imagined him as like this fringer who found his way into an Imperial uniform, who then got somehow promoted.
Yeah.
And then found himself on a station. You almost felt like more of like an intelligence officer, like somebody who was just, I got info. Like you were an information broker.
Right.
And that's what made it feel like Fringe to me, that character. Even though you were prepared, you could be professional when you needed to be and stuff like that. And I don't know, it just, and then you getting mixed up in the you're getting in shootouts on the station. If anyone's going to get in a shootout, if anyone's going to get in a corridor shootout, it's the fucking ex-criminal. So that really worked out for me, man. I thought that was a good job.
Thanks.
And of course, Josh is and the joke is, this is what we pay our tax dollars for. But the joke is obviously Josh's setup of the entire thing. You creating the framework, knowing what you know about org charts in the military, gave us the offer. It's kind of like you imagine if you're on in a James Cameron movie, you're like, okay, I can get into character because look at this fucking set. Yeah, like that's kind of how I felt in this game, and obviously hats off to Josh for that. But yeah, man, I don't know. That's my round of Circus Seal cocksucking, but I mean all of it.
Yeah, so. I mean the NPCs in this game were probably the most fleshed out feeling NPCs.
To do.
Yeah.
All of them had very unique voices, and
just keep queuing them up. Keep on to the next one.
That's super hard to do.
It is, and it was great. It was
Space
awesome.
Texas, it's a place.
I mean, I'll say that's I appreciate it. That's the thing I'm the most proud of, but it's also a collective pride. I think this felt somebody who was in the military, and this felt authentic to me in terms of how a military unit works, how a staff works, how a ship/station crew work.
Or sometimes doesn't work.
Or doesn't work.
Yeah.
I think it felt really authentic, and I was really happy about that. And as far as the NPCs, like that was, it was fun. And obviously there's a couple that were a little over the top that I had the most fun with. I mean, honestly, the governor and Thorn, I didn't intend to become as fucking comical as they were. But in a pretty serious game, it was good to have some comic relief.
Yeah,
but
agreed.
Something for me that was like not that they all were hits, but every single character on the ship, essentially on Reiko, was modeled after a real person, generally that I served with the exception of Thorn, almost entirely made up, like little bit there. So that was something I wanted to bring to life. Like, these are all real people. The fucking privates.
Can I still sign up if Marita's real?
Unfortunately, no. I guess every military
I'm just teasing you.
But then even like, in the Cleary, I already joked like it didn't become a real thing, but like, all that shit down there, like that was like a lot of that was inspired by like Afghan like culture,
absolutely.
The Pashtunwali shit.
Yeah.
So like I wanted there to be, Star Wars is crazy space opera, space fantasy shit, and I wanted this to feel very grounded and yet in that world. And I do feel like something that was cool is I think we batted 750. I think 3 out of the 4 of you, I ended up having an interesting relationship between you and your subordinate. Dan, it never really happened because the way because there was something I thought I'd wanted to do with all the characters, including the ones that didn't get played. Like there was that Duros, whatever. But I thought like Argus and Cestlin, that became a very interesting thing. The Doctor and Harper, especially
that might
with
be
how
the best one. Well, actually, maybe some of John's were too.
John and Sue were very cool.
I think for Nero though, it just went the other direction.
Yes.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Correct.
Because
it went up.
I realized like it's just going to be shoehorning something in. Because it was basically going to be like, I had this idea that Triald was more of like a by the book kind of, and I'm like, well, that's just a boring fucking
Yeah.
thing, whatever.
But I had between the relationship with Thorn, the relationship with the later EXO. What was her name?
Cecily.
Cecilin,
Cecilin?
the one that like didn't like you at all.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Cecilin. So like, and then even my relationship with Roy to some degree too. All of those.
Yeah, you had a lot of good.
Yeah.
There was. That's kind of it just went up instead of down.
Yeah.
It's cool.
I love playing the governor too. It's my favorite.
It's funny because when you're the DM, you know, sometimes you find yourself routinely unsurprised by things, whereas players get to be surprised often. You know, designing the podcast around cliffhangers, etc. But there was a couple of moments of true surprise on Josh's face. Probably one of the greatest one was when I shot Thorn. His face was like, "Oh,
So amazing.
boy, what the fuck?"
You fucking what? That was good. I did not see that coming, and that was I'm so happy with how that went because it was very important to me that wrapped up well for you both as like a character and a player.
Sure,
Like that Thorn thing had been such a, you know, pun intended, thorn in your side.
Yeah.
That I'm glad it.
Well, yeah, and
Culminated.
for me to be able to delete the video footage,
that's so
having
good.
watching that like
Yeah.
happen and knowing it was going to happen, it was just like it encapsulated everything that we'd been kind of building up to.
Yeah.
Well, anything else? Any other shit that anybody wants to throw out there? Comments, questions, fucking
did you guys know that?
philosophy?
Dear God, no. Did you guys know that? Do you guys know that Argus went to Scout Sniper School? Because apparently he never misses.
Yeah, I was like, oh, too bad none of these players played like combat capable characters. And then the Doctor and Argus are just stacking bodies like cordwood.
And Raynar never getting hurt throughout
my
the
God,
entire.
yeah.
Yeah,
I had
so
so many
weird.
character points at the end of the game.
Yeah, you never even like.
I got stunned like a couple times, and
Yeah.
that's basically
I
it.
nearly died multiple times. Multiple times. I had a question for you, Josh, in terms of knowing or having a concept maybe of some of the things that were going to happen. Do you think having an intrigue game, because that's what I felt like we did. We played an intrigue game because of the characters we picked and what we did. Do you have any sort of preference between intrigue and perhaps more of an action oriented game? Did you have something like that queued up? And I mean, it's going to be interesting to maybe we'll get feedback from listeners too eventually about what interests them as well. But I'm just curious from your point of view.
I thought it was going to be more action than it was originally envisioning it, and I would say this was more work, but more rewarding.
Sure.
I was nervous almost every time we sat down because I always felt underprepared because I didn't really. I mean, I did a ton of work in this game, but I didn't do a lot of game prep for almost any session.
Sure.
Because it was always like, well, I don't really know what they're going to do or say or who they're going to talk to or fucking whatever. So I just had to kind of rely on, and I guess like I wouldn't necessarily say that I was super nervous. I got comfortable with being unprepared.
Yeah.
Because I just, like, you guys were so good at the characters, and I was just like, well, I kind of know who all these other people are, so they'll just be themselves when you interact with them. So yeah, I guess action is kind of easier.
Yeah.
But like, this is really rewarding to be a part of, at least. I don't know as much as a listener, but I think it's very rewarding to be a part of.
Coolio. Well, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was super
Thank
fun.
you.
Word. All right. Well, thank you guys, of course, for listening. We'll have a goddamn brand new arc coming your way next week. And I think for this one, we will be bidding Dean adieu temporarily, and we will be welcoming Jake back and possibly another.
One other.
So
A new person?
Ryan.
Oh, right. Cool. Nice.
Yeah, who has only been in a part of one arc because of scheduling and life shit.
Yep.
So
Right on.
Life.
going around, anything you guys want to plug individually? Obviously, Dean, why don't you start off since you won't be on the next arc, and obviously you have a lot of things.
Yeah,
to listen to.
I podcast about stuff. Just Google LSG Media. That's good enough for me.
I don't have anything going on in life. I have a job. I work. I make pizza. That's it.
Fuck yeah.
If you guys could contribute to my OnlyFans website, I'd really appreciate it.
All foot.
I'm still
pics,
waiting
right?
for. I'm still waiting for my feet pics.
Yeah, right. Well, you got to build the suspense.
Yeah.
God.
Yep. All right.
I like the toe rings down.
Yeah.
Well, until next time, guys, we will see you back for Nastygram. Thank you for being part of our Empire's End.
Bye.
Adios.
Peace.